Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Robyn MacKillop, and today we are going to work on some language arts problems. Lots of reading, lots of questions on the language arts test. Most of the time, not all the time, and maybe not even most, but some of the time you can get away without reading. And we're going to practice that. We're going to look at different readings and see how you can get around not reading the entire thing. Because reading everything, you'll run out of time. And it won't give you time to think through what the best answers might be. So there are some tricks to looking at the question and knowing that you can answer it without reading. So we'll check that out. All right, I'm going to share screen and we'll get going. Okay, so here we've got, always check the title on every test you take. Check the title. Every once in a while, that's your answer. And that's the only thing you need to know is the title. In this case, we've got a really short reading, but we're going to check the question first. The narrator says that Simon Wheeler reeled off the monotonous narrative. The connotations of the term reeled off instead of the neutral word told, and monotonous instead of the neutral word study, suggests that the story will. This one you can actually answer without reading. The reading will not necessarily help you because they give you enough information in the question. What they're asking you to do is based on that small phrase, reeled off the monotonous narrative. They're asking you to figure out what that means. So does that mean it contains many details? Does it mean it expresses deep and sincere emotion? Does it mean it can be told in a boring and expressionless way? Or does it mean it often strays from the main topic? Reeled off the monotonous narrative. And monotonous is another term for boring. What do you think? Monotonous is the key term there. So your answer is going to be C. I don't particularly love the way the question is phrased. I don't think it lends itself really well to knowing what they want immediately. But when you get something from the reading in quotes, very rarely do you have to go back and read. Usually what they give you either a partial sentence or a full sentence. And it's enough to be able to answer that question without going back into the reading. So that's something to think about. Anytime you've got quotation marks, you take a look and see if you can answer it without reading. And, if you can't, it's perfectly okay. Just go back and read, especially when they're short like this. That's not such a big deal. You just don't want to have to read every word of every piece of writing on the language arts test because you'll run out of time. You won't finish. And that's no fun. No fun at all. All right, let's go to the next one. And we're going to skip that. You guys can do that one on your own. All right, the strange house. Again, we're going to look at the question first. Whoops. Why does John shut the window? We don't know, right? We're going to have to read this one. We just have no idea. Hi, Sultan. Welcome. So I will let it alone and talk about the house. There was some legal trouble, I believe, something about the heirs and co-heirs. Anyhow, the place has been empty for years. That spoils my ghostliness. I am afraid, but I don't care. There's something strange about that house. I can feel it. I even said so to John one moonlit evening, but he said what I felt was the draft and shut the window. There it is. Why does he shut the window? The narrator feels a chill from the open window. The narrator says the house is strange and spooky. John has a nervous condition and insensitive to cold, or John does not want to see the moonlight.
Is it B?
It's not. So I said so to John one moonlight. Yeah. And he said what I felt was a draft and shut the window. So you didn't even have to read the whole thing because you knew what they were asking. And as soon as you found that piece, then you could determine which answer was correct. And you don't have to read the rest of the literature. It's perfect. Yeah, it's A. He felt a chill, so he shut the window. Nice. Okay, this one's going to be a bit longer. Yep, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 questions. This is from Nebraska to Boston, and we're going to check the questions again anyway. Number 2 is the narrator's aunt must go to Boston, so we're going to have to figure that out. We'll have to read. Why does the letter from the narrator's uncle arrive so late? We're going to have to read. How does the thought of Aunt Georgina affect the narrator? And as a result of her journey on the day coach, Aunt Georgina, clearly, we're going to have to read this one. But we know what the questions are. So if we find them in there, we can stop, or we can just read the whole thing and then go back and look at the questions and have an idea of where the answers might be. All right, from Nebraska to Boston. I received one morning a letter written in pale ink on glassy blue-lined notepaper and bearing the postmark of a little Nebraska village. This communication, worn and rubbed, looking as though it had been carried for some days in a coat pocket that was none too clean, was from my Uncle Howard. It informed me that his wife had been left a small legacy by a bachelor relative who recently died, and that it had become necessary for her to come to Boston to attend to the settling of the estate. He requested me to meet her at the station and render her whatever services might prove necessary. On examining the date indicated as that of her arrival, I found it no later than tomorrow. He had characteristically delayed writing until, had I been away from home for a day, I must have missed the good woman altogether. Are any of this, can we answer any of these based on that first paragraph? The narrator's aunt must go to Boston. Why?
To attend the funeral.
B.
B, to settle the relative's estate. And I think we can answer number 3 as well from that first paragraph. Why does the letter from the narrator's uncle arrive so late? Did the carrier not deliver it promptly? Did the narrator's uncle send it at the last minute? Did the narrator's aunt and uncle have only a little time to prepare for an unexpected trip? Or did the narrator's uncle had to attend to problems relating to a legacy?
I think so, D.
D. Now, did they mention legacy?
I think so, B. Then.
Yeah, it's going to be B like boy. If you said
Yeah.
B, I heard D. I'm sorry. It's B like boy.
Yeah.
It is right where she says he had characteristically delayed writing until. So he's known to be a procrastinator. That's a characteristic of him. So with that first paragraph, you got rid of 2 of these. And it looks like the next one we've got to, maybe we can answer number 4. How does the thought of Aunt Georgina affect the narrator? No, I think we have to read further to get that one.
Yeah.
So let me see if I can get all of this on one page. Almost. Yep, we can do it. All right. The name of my Aunt Georgina called up not alone her own figure, at once pathetic and grotesque, but opened before my feet a gulf of recollection so wide and deep that as the letter dropped from my hand, I felt suddenly a stranger to all the present conditions of my existence, wholly ill at ease and out of place amid the surroundings of my study. I became, in short, the gangling farmer boy my aunt had known, scourged with childblains and bashfulness, my hands cracked and raw from the corn husking. I felt the knuckles of my thumb tentatively as though they were raw again. I sat again before her parlor organ, thumbing through the scales with my stiff red hands, while she beside me made canvas mittens for the huskers. So the answer to number 4 is in that, and it's an interpretation. How does a thought of Aunt Georgina affect the narrator? The narrator fondly remembers his childhood interactions with his aunt. He resents his uncle for asking him to help his aunt. He recalls the awkwardness and discomfort of his childhood, or he feels excited to reconnect.
C.
Yeah. And the first couple lines are odd. They're oddly phrased. This is not how we speak in these days. But all of a sudden he starts talking about how he was gawky and his hands were damaged from working the corn husks. And so it's pretty clear he was not particularly comfortable as a child. So perfect. As a result of her journey, okay, so we got to keep reading. We've got 3 of them down, 2 more to go. The next morning, after preparing my landlady somewhat, I set out for the station. When the train arrived, I had some difficulty in finding my aunt. She was the last of the passengers to alight, and when I got her into the carriage, she looked not unlike one of those charred, smoked bodies that firemen lift from the debris of a burned building. That's a description. She had come all the way in a day coach. Her lime duster had become black with soot, and her black bonnet gray with dust during the journey. When we arrived at my boarding house, the landlady put her to bed at once, and I did not see her again until morning. So as a result of her journey in that coach, Georgina was covered in soot and dust, arrived in Boston sooner than expected, last passenger, or hides from her nephew and his landlady.
So A.
It is A, yeah, she's covered, she's really gray and black, which is why he said she looked like a body they pulled from a burning building, which is a terrible description. It was actually a really good description, but a terrible image. And then what is the most likely reason Aunt Georgina goes to bed immediately? Is it because she's uncomfortable around him? She's embarrassed about her appearance? She could not sleep on the train, or she's exhausted from the journey?
Can go with D, I think so.
Yeah, she's exhausted, and it would be exhausting. Those stagecoaches were not comfortable ways to travel.
Yeah.
And if she's covered in soot and dust, that means she's breathing it all the way too.
Yeah.
Yuck. Good job. And that one was written, let me see if 1904. So the language is very different than what we're used to today. They use words even very differently than we do now. And that makes it a little tough.
Yeah.
It's quite a bit tougher to get through that. And I told you I would send you,
All right.
and I've got it in print. I can't find it on my computer, so I'm gonna have to scan it again. I know I had it downloaded, but I'll scan it today and get it to you this.
Okay, I'll grab some.
Because you'll be able to read older writings and get more comfortable with the difference. And a lot of the stuff on the GED really comes down to familiarity with things. Math is math. You have to know the math. But in all of the reading portions of language arts, science, and social studies, you're not going to know everything they write about. There's going to
Yeah.
be a lot that's unfamiliar, especially in science. You couldn't study for the science test if you wanted to know everything they might throw at you. You'd be
Yeah,
studying.
just you know about the formula and everything, only these things you should know.
Yeah. So the familiarity with things and the way that GED structures questions and reading can help you,
Mhm.
and it'll keep you from having to read the entire thing every time you get a new reading. All right. This one, which statement describes one way in which Emily and Susan are different? We're going to be forced to read this because that's not enough information, but it's short. So that's all right. Oh, there are conflicts between the others too, each one human, needing, demanding, hurting, taking, but only between Emily and Susan. No, Emily toward Susan, that corroding resentment. It seems so obvious on the surface, yet it is not obvious. Susan, the second child, Susan, golden and curly haired and chubby, quick and articulate and assured, everything in appearance and manner, Emily was not. Susan, not able to resist Emily's precocious things, losing or sometimes clumsily breaking them. Susan telling jokes and riddles to company for applause, while Emily sat silent. To say to me later, that was my riddle, mother, I told it to Susan. Susan, who for all the 5 years difference in age, was just a year behind Emily in developing physically. I am glad for that slow physical development that widened the difference between her and her contemporaries, though she suffered over it. She was too vulnerable for that terrible world of youthful competition, of preening and parading, of constant measuring of yourself against every other, of envy. So the last paragraph is not that helpful. So ignore the last paragraph. What we are looking for are ways in which Emily and Susan are different. And they mostly describe Susan and then pull Emily in. This is what Emily isn't. So Susan is clumsy and ill at ease in company, but Emily is not. Susan finds more riddles than Emily does. Emily enjoys sharing her possessions, but Susan does not. Or Emily is slower to develop physically than Susan is. So looking at this, do we think Susan's clumsy and ill at ease?
No.
No, she's
No.
extrovert.
Okay.
And
I think
Emily
the C. I think the C.
enjoys sharing her possessions, but Susan does not.
I think so.
B.
And Susan finds more riddles than Emily does. Emily is actually the one that comes up with the riddles and tells them to
Yeah.
Susan. But Susan
The
being a
D.
pig, dog,
B.
The D is not right because Emily is not slower.
right? And C is it. You end up with C because you can get rid of A, you can get rid of B, and you can get rid
Yeah.
of. And that's a really good strategy too. Sometimes it's easier to find the correct. And it gets you down to 2. Sometimes it gets you down to 1.
Yeah.
You
Right.
say no to A, no to B, maybe to C. Oh, no, no to D. You know it's C.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's so much with the paragraph.
Yeah. And this last paragraph was useless.
Yeah.
It was just extra reading and extra.
Yeah. Just to divert you.
Yes. And she kind of changed the way she was writing for the second paragraph. It became a little more clinical, for lack of a better word. This was pretty clear. We were talking about an
Yeah.
extroverted child versus an introverted child.
Yeah.
It was a little more clinical. We didn't need it. Okay, I'll let you guys do the fill-ins on your own. Let's try Southern and Northern perspectives. This will be interesting. This might be a little bit social studies, but maybe not. All right, so Southern and Northern perspectives. We've got the narrator says that Gloria is third generation Northern born. This information is important because we may need to read a little bit for that, just to have it in context. And then number 5, the narrator says that his wife hates the South. Her dislike for the South most likely indicates that this one we could probably figure out just based on the idea, if you hate something, why would you hate it? Is it because he dislikes the South? Is it because they live somewhere else, because they don't always agree, or because she's never been there? You could get it down to 2 without reading, but I think we're going to have to read for both of these. Excuse me. I tend to argue the point, but quietly, and mostly to myself. Gloria was born and raised in New York. She has come to believe in the stock exchange as the only index of economic health. My perceptions were shaped in South Carolina, and long ago I learned there, as a waiter in private clubs, to gauge economic flux by the tips people leave. We tend to agree on other matters too, but the thing that gives me most frustration is trying to make her understand why I like country music. Perhaps it is because she hates the South and has catapulted emotionally to the horror stories told by refugees from down home. Perhaps it is because Gloria is third generation Northern born. I don't know. What I do know is that while the 2 of us are Black, the distance between us is sometimes as great as that between Igbo and Yoruba. So Igbo and Yoruba, I believe, are 2 places. I'm not sure where. So we go back up to the narrator. The narrator says Gloria is third generation Northern born. That's important because why? Does it contrast her background with her husband's? Does it imply that her husband is also from the North? Does it emphasize her indifference toward the North? Or does it show that she and her husband have similar beliefs?
Let's see.
And she's from the North.
So
A.
Yep. Her husband's from South Carolina, so he's from a solid Southern state. And she's from New York, very Northern, very different set of culture, really, even though they're not that far apart. The narrator says that his wife hates the South. Her dislike for the South most likely indicates that he dislikes the South, they live elsewhere, they don't always agree, or she has never been there. And look at this area here.
it's
Oh, I made the whole thing blue. That wasn't good.
Is it D?
It is deep. She's probably never been there. And when they say she's reacting to horror stories told by refugees from down south, they're just talking about people who have moved to New York from the South who say, oh, I'm never going back. It's so hot, or it's so this, or it's so that. And we've all been in situations like that, where someone's really adamant that whether they like or dislike something, and they've really never experienced it. So good job. The reading itself was a little bit easier, but I don't think the questions were.
yeah,
It's
it was a
really
little bit.
Dig in.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. It will be better. You give some of like this work to each.
Yeah, and the sad thing is you don't have time to really delve into during the test because that stupid timer is ticking down. So practicing things like this, getting used to the different types of literature that they can throw at you and the way that GED phrases their questions will help you immensely. And I know it's really hard to be in that test and think, I'm going to answer this without reading the whole thing, because you feel like I need to read the whole thing. I need to know all the information. And sometimes you just don't. And so getting comfortable with only reading parts of it, that's tough. It's hard to do. All right. Let's go to Mr. Hale goes to the house. I like these short ones. You can have a bunch of short ones on the test, but you know, they'll give you some long ones. And this was written in 1917, so it could be a little awkward in the way they use language as well. And we're looking for a complication that Mr. Hale discovers at Mrs. Wright's house. And we're going to have to read it because that's not enough information. Well, Mr. Hale, said the county attorney, tell just what happened when you came here yesterday morning. I didn't see or hear anything. I knocked at the door. I knock again louder, and I thought I heard somebody say, come in. I wasn't sure. I'm not sure yet. But I opened the door, this door, jerking a hand toward the door by which the two women stood. And there in that rocker, pointing to it, sat Mrs. Wright. I thought of Harry and the team outside, so I said a little sharp, can't I see John? No, she's kind of dull-like. Ain't he? Says I. Then she looked at me. Yes, she says, he's home. Then why can't I see him? I asked her, out of patience with her now. 'Cause he's dead, said she, just as quiet and dull, and fell to the pleating of her apron. The pleating of her apron, she's probably messing around with it in her hands. It's kind of pleats used to be the term for braid. So when little girls had braids, people called them pleats, which was weird. But it's also, you ever make a paper airplane? Those folds that you make are pleats. So she's probably toying with her apron. What complication does Mr. Hale discover at Mrs. Wright's house? He sees that Mrs. Wright is ill. He learns that John is dead. No one can answer the door. Mrs. Wright cannot speak. What's
Is it B?
It's B, yeah. The guy he's gonna come to see has died and nobody told him. And he's getting irritated with the wife because one, she didn't answer the door, and two, she wasn't very clear, but she's probably grieving, right? And grief does strange things to people. That one wasn't bad. The reading was interesting, a lot of conversation. But, oh, look at this. News comes to a grieving wife. All right, and this is from 1832, Nathaniel Hawthorne. Prolific writer. This is going to be Old English. Which sentence from the story belongs to the exposition? That's something we're going to have to read about. What complication does Goodman Parker's news to Margaret reveal? Margaret screams at Goodman Parker to find out his news. In terms of plot events, the most likely reason for Goodman Parker to delay Margaret the news is to. So we're going to have to read this one, and it's a long one, but we will be able to do it. All right. So the first question, which sentence from the story? All right, we'll see. Two young women sat together by the fireside, nursing their mutual and peculiar sorrows. They were the recent brides of two brothers, a sailor and a landsman, and 2 successive days had brought the chances of Canadian and the tempestuous Atlantic. They joined their hearts and wept together silently. So 2 young women, their new husbands have both died in very different, one died in the Canadian in a war, and one died at sea. Time went on, and their usual hour of repose arrived. Then the widowed ones retired to their own rooms. Mary soon sank into temporary forgetfulness, while Margaret became more disturbed and feverish as the night advanced. While Margaret groaned in bitterness, she heard a knock at the street door. Seizing the lamp from the hearth, she hastened to the window that overlooked the street door. A man in a broad-brimmed hat looked upward to discover whom his application had aroused. Margaret knew him as the friendly innkeeper of the town. "What would you have, Goodman Parker?" cried the widow. "Is it you, Mistress Margaret?" replied the innkeeper. I was afraid it might be your sister Mary, for I hate to see a young woman in trouble when I have not a word of comfort to whisper her. For heaven's sake, what news do you bring? Screamed Margaret. Why, there's been an express through the town within this half hour, said Goodman Parker, traveling from the eastern jurisdiction with letters from the governor and council. He tarried at my house to refresh himself with a drop and a morsel, and I asked him what tidings on the frontiers. He tells me we had the better in the skirmish you heard of, and that 13 men reported slain are well and sound, and your husband among them. I judged you would not mind being broke of your rest, so I stepped over to tell you. Good night. So saying, the honest man departed, and his lantern gleamed along the street, bringing to view indistinct shapes of things and the fragments of a world, like order glimmering through chaos, or memory roaming over the past. But Margaret stayed not to watch these picturesque effects. Joy flashed in her heart and lighted it up at once, and breathless, she flew to the bedside of her sister. She paused, however, at the door of the chamber, while a thought of pain broke upon her. Got to go back up because there's another line at the very top. Whoops. Whoa. Poor Mary, she said to herself. Shall I waken her to feel her sorrow sharpened by my happiness? No, I will keep it till tomorrow. So a long way of saying both young women were told their husbands died in very different areas and very different reasons. And then they find out, one of the women finds out her husband isn't dead. So you've got one widowed sister and one who's now very happy. Second story belongs to the exposition. This is a strange question. Time went on and their usual hour of repose arrived. That would be they're going to bed. While Margaret groaned in bitterness, she heard a knock at the street door. They were the recent brides of two brothers and the tempestuous Atlantic. A man in a broad-brimmed hat looked upward to discover whom his application had aroused. Meaning, when he knocked on the door, who did he wake up? Which sentence from the story belongs to the exposition? I don't even really.
It's a B.
Say be like boy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, it's be like boy. Good job, because that's a tough one.
Yeah.
What complication does Goodman Parker's news to Margaret reveal? Is it that Margaret's husband is actually alive? Mary's husband is dead. 13 men have been killed, or Margaret's husband has returned to her?
E.
A like apple.
No, C like cat, I think.
So both of these sisters are now grieving widows until Mr. Goodman Parker arrives.
Yeah.
What?
A.
Yes.
Yeah. Because the husband is alive.
It's not a grieving widow, but her sister.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is A. Her husband, that's great news, but not so much for Mary. Margaret screams at Goodman Parker to find out his news. In terms of plot events, the most likely reason for Goodman Parker to delay telling Margaret the news is he trying to create humor in the story by showing that Goodman Parker is long-winded? Is it to add another complication to the plot? Is it to provide additional exposition by giving more insight into Margaret's character? Or is it to heighten the suspense of the plot? So he delays in telling her. Think about TV shows when you watch them.
Is it D?
It is D. The longer he takes, the more suspense there is. What's he going to say? And then the last one. What new complication is introduced after Goodman Parker shares the news? Margaret rushes to Mary's bedside. Margaret waits to tell Mary the news. Goodman Parker leaves, or Margaret feels a flash of joy. So what's the next problem that arises now that she knows her husband's alive?
B.
B like boy. Yep.
Yes.
She
Yes.
wants to tell Mary, 'cause it's not going to be great for Mary.
Yeah, I think so.
So perfect. Good job, you guys. All right. I'm going to cut today short because I've got another appointment. But what'd you think of that? There's a couple more pages that you can do. Gold Rush Businesswoman and Careful Preparations. And there were a couple fill-ins that I skipped over. Take a look at those because there will be drag and drops or fill-ins on the test. So good practice. They're harder to teach online, but we certainly can do it. And if you need any feedback, just let me know. Let's see, let me switch it to the gallery. Nice, we've got an excellent group. So tomorrow, science will continue with chemical equations and we'll do some, who was in science last week? How'd you like those chemical equations?
Was good.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
interesting. So we'll do them and then we'll do some backwards because you'll get backwards questions on the test. GED loves that. You learn it one way and they ask you the opposite way. And it's like, wait, I know how to get there. How do I go backwards? And it's exactly what you're going to do. You're just going to go backwards. All right. Well, then I will see most of you tomorrow. If you're done with science, you don't need to come tomorrow. And I got the math sent out to everybody. And then when this gets uploaded, I'll get this sent out to you too. And go ahead and finish up the parts that we didn't do.
Yeah.
If you need feedback, just snap a picture or
I'll
and
send you email.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super easy to
Good.
snap with your phone and send it that way.
Yeah.
And also, I think my phone number is on there. You can also text it to me. Sometimes that's easy. So,
It will be better to share. I don't think so. We had it.
I think it's on the bottom of the email.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's there.
It will
Yes.
be better. It will be better to have a one WhatsApp group as well.
Oh, I was starting to set that up. I will do that. I started.
Yeah, because it will be very good for the rest of students.
Perfect. I will do
Yeah, you can access in the group the whole work at a time.
Nice. Excellent. All right. I'll finish doing that.
Yeah.
Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Yes. And I'll find the literature and get that to you. I know I've got it. I've got it hard copy. I know I have it electronically, but if I can't find it, I'll just rescan it and send it to you electronically.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Robyn.
Oh, you're so welcome. And I will see
Thank you.
Oh, you're
Thank you so much.
welcome. Yes. Have a good day, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Yeah,
Have a good
thank
day.
you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.